Oh, it's a Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Association Exchange today. I'm Sherry Singer, president of Singer Communication, and I'm the founder and co-organizer of Association Exchange. We'll get started in just a few minutes. We have a number of people joining us today, and so we're going to wait for a minute for everybody to get in. And while we're doing that, I know, and I live in Washington, D.C., right outside of Washington, D.C., and our temperatures this week are going to be like 100, 105. What are you guys doing when the temperature gets that hot? And, anybody post another question similar to that one is anybody have any great plans for the 4th of July? And feel free to type your answers in the chat. Denise is heading to the pool. Anisha is going to the beach. Lindsay's going to the movies. That's a good one, Lindsay.
You might need to bring a blanket, actually. They get so cold.
In the movie. My husband plays the drums for a yacht rock band.
Wow.
Who are they playing, Rebecca?
Well,
I might want to go. Anybody else want to put in? Scottsdale. Oh, it's in Scottsdale. Thanks, Rebecca. I don't think I'm flying out there. Oh, I love that title. Ship Happens is the name of Rebecca's husband's band.
Oh, that's great.
It's hysterical. Wine tasting in Canada. That's a really good one, David. For some reason, I decided to redo my yard and build a retaining wall myself. Sheila, good luck with that. Do it in the morning. We want you to be with us next week. Decide with a good book, says Erica, or a movie. Yep. Good one. I'm a big Netflix binger. Okay, we're still waiting for a few people to join us. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Thank you for joining us today. If you're just joining us, we have a question in the chat. What will you be doing in the heat on this July 4th weekend? And you can put your answers in the chat. And by the way, as we get started, we will ask you to put your answers, questions. If you have any questions for Denise, we will ask you to put those cues in the chat so that we have access to it rather than in Q&A. And if you have comments to make during the session, feel free to put them in the chat as well. Sometimes we have a really good chat going. Judith said she's going to be catching up on reading. I hope it's fun reading and not work reading. Elena says pool time. Brian says enjoying the cool weather in northern Wisconsin. Yeah, Brian, where's your house? We might all be joining you. Okay, well, it's about 12:02. I think we'll get started today. As I said, thank you so much for joining us today. This is our last Association Exchange until September. We take a break in July and August. So thank you for joining us today. And we are looking forward to hearing our topic. And I am going to turn it over to Kirk Gallagher, one of our other co-organizers, who's going to introduce Denise. And before I do that, please feel free to put any questions for Denise into the chat as we go along, and we'll be jotting those down and then feeding them to her at the end of her presentation. So Kurt, do you want to start with the intro to Denise?
Sure. Thanks so much, Sherry. I'm Kirk Gallagher, and I have the honor of introducing a colleague and friend here at Smith Buckland, Denise Roosendaal. So Denise is a 37-year veteran of association management, and she also serves as executive director of the Institute for Credentialing Excellence. She's held that position for 14 years, which in itself is impressive. She earned her BA at University of Virginia and a Master's of Public Administration from Syracuse University. Here at Smith Buckland, we are organized with client networks, and she's one of the leads of one of those networks where she works with a variety of boards on governance issues, best practices, strategic planning, organizational strategy. She holds a CAE. She's held that since 2001, and she's also an ASCE fellow, which she became in 2022. And you've read any of the ASCE material. She's co-author of the chapter of the ASCE Handbook of Professional Practices and Association Management on Credentialing. And then finally, back in 2018, not that far ago, she's a recipient of the Ben Schimberg Public Service Award, which is given annually by Citizen Advocacy. So, Denise, thank you so much for being our guest today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much. And I have to say, let me share my screen. Can you all see that? I have to say that one of my favorite activities in the association community is just sharing and having conversation with colleagues so that we are addressing the big topics of the day. So I really appreciate everyone being here, and I'm looking forward to a great dialogue. As Kurt mentioned, I am Executive Director of the Institute for Credentialing Excellence. Our members are certification bodies, and I've been in that role for 14 years, as Kurt said. And I have also learned quite a bit in my role as Vice President at Smith Buckland, especially in the client network arena. So I'm working with lots of other boards and really getting to see patterns and recognize challenges that our boards face. So that's sort of what I'm drawing on through our time today. Now, let's talk about what we're going to cover. Excuse me. We're going to talk a little bit about burnout symptoms. What does it look like? What does it feel like? How to spot them? We're going to get inside the mind of a volunteer and really think about what they're facing. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the role of a board member or a volunteer for your organization and talk about their engagement so that we can maybe try to prevent that burnout that we're all feeling. And then we'll talk about at the end, when all else fails, what do you do about a board member who may have reached that burnout stage, and how do you proceed? So before that, however, I have two theories I want to float. These are my theories on burnout. I think burnout is caused either by sheer workload issue or by a mismatch of expectations and culture. And we're going to unpack those. And it may be that in your situation, it's a combination of both. But I want to test these theories as we continue to chat today and get your input on whether or not there's some truth there. Okay, so first, let's talk about what burnout is, what it looks like. And as I'm talking, please feel free to put in the chat what you see as burnout symptoms with your boards and with your volunteers. I really want to hear your perspectives here. But what we're looking at is that potential lack of engagement, missing meetings, maybe missing deadlines, perhaps delayed response time, or maybe going incommunicado altogether. Maybe there's a sense of apathy or frustration. Maybe it's coming across as cynicism or negative comments. And by negative comments, I don't mean just critical comments, because we should welcome criticism, input, evaluating how we're doing, but that sort of negative comment that isn't helpful, right? So if you're starting to see some of that, that could be a sign of burnout. Maybe there are relationship challenges and conflicts among the board members or between board and staff. Maybe there are physical signs, sheer fatigue. We all know what burnout feels like, but everyone can experience this differently physically. There can also be real serious mental health symptoms that we should pay attention to. And while we are not mental health experts, we should be thoughtful and offer grace. You're going to hear me use that word a lot in the next couple of minutes. Grace is a really important element of this, but we have to be cognizant of where our members are. Let's see, continuing to do work you're capable of and good at, but that doesn't reach your sweet spot or working genius. I love this comment, Michael. So I'm going to address that. I believe that's part of the potential mismatch in my theory. So let's put a pin in that and come back to that. But please continue to put symptoms of burnout as you see them in your organization. Sil is saying, are we having staff turning to our volunteer regulars or stars too much? Great point, Sil. Absolutely. There's a theory for that too. So I'm going to come to that. Not reaching goals despite the efforts and despite prompting folks to get work done or get projects done. So yeah, that's a really important element as well. All right. So please keep putting those ideas in the chat, but let's move on. to get inside the mind of a board member. Look, board members are attracted to the work of your organization because they are high performers. They are busy individuals. So it kind of goes with the territory that as we're soliciting leadership, we are attracting those people who are high performers and are already naturally busy. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. We want our leaders to be engaged and be those high performers, but we've got to be careful about this potential burnout. Balancing personal and professional lives. We're all dealing with that, right? How do we balance a crazy work schedule with all of the demands of home and family and personal pursuits? How do we balance all of that with what feels like an increasingly rapid pace of change? So there is a lot that is on all of our plates in terms of how we're balancing our work and professional lives. But in particular, board members are having to do this as well. Technology, whether friend or foe. And I put this on here because sometimes I feel that boards, we introduce technology to boards to help them be efficient, to help engage, to help communication, to help sort all of the material that we're putting in front of them. But there are times when board members can get frustrated by that technology and, in fact, may be a hindrance to their engagement. So I love board portals. I love Miro board. There's so much technology out there, but we should pay attention to how our board members are engaging with that technology and whether or not it's an obstacle or is enhancing their engagement. I'm going to talk a lot about expectations of our board members and what they have coming into the role and how it's communicated to them. But every one of your board members, well, every one of my board members are coming to the table with a certain amount of expectations that we should make sure we are considering. One of those expectations, or one of the things that I think board members are very cognizant of, is their own reputation and being accountable for their work. And this shows up in so many different ways. One of them has to do with fiscal management and being able to report to members about the fiscal responsibilities that they have and the fiscal health of the organization. And that can be very daunting and stressful for board members. So we should pay attention to that. I'm going to come back to a couple of ideas I have there. And then thinking about motivations. So everyone comes to volunteer service with a certain amount of motivation. What's the ROI for their leadership service? And everyone will tell you that they want to give back to the organization that has meant so much to them. But I suspect there are other ways that they would like to get ROI from their service. Maybe that's what they're bringing to the table, what they're getting in return. Or perhaps maybe it's networking, maybe it's developing friendships with others in the organization. So we should pay attention to what those motivations are so that we're fulfilling them. I think that's an important aspect of why they come to volunteer in the first place. Okay, so let's talk about getting immediate relief if you've got a board member who is expressing burnout or you're seeing these signs and suspecting some burnout. So what are some immediate things that you might do? First of all, as I said, start with grace. Be understanding of a board member and really try to help understand where they are struggling the most and how where they feel they are falling down, and see what we can determine, probe a little bit about what the pressures are that they are feeling. So this is just a plain old one-on-one discussion with that board member to say, hey, you seem perhaps a little stressed. What can I do to help, right? So it might also mean talking about it a little bit in a larger scale with your officers or perhaps even the board as a whole. whole to try to get an understanding how you are working together and what does this burnout feel like? How is it showing up? Is it showing up for more than one person? So this is a really important aspect just to get clarity around what this burnout looks like for either one or more board members. One thing I like to do is to survey leadership after an in-person meeting. How did we do? How did you prepare? Did you feel prepared for the board meeting? Did we accomplish what you expected that we would accomplish? And just sort of give folks a chance to weigh in on any frustrations they may be feeling as a result of that board meeting. So I always like to do a couple of these a year, and then maybe an annual one at the end of the year. How did we do this whole year, right? So that's another tool in your toolkit. But something to get clarity on is, where is the burnout happening? Is it before meetings, in preparation for meetings? Is the burnout and the stress coming during meetings? Or is it coming after meetings when the to-do list starts to show up with everything that everyone talked about? So those are some things to really just get an understanding of what's the scale of the problem, right? Then we could look at some quick tactics for immediate relief. Maybe it's just a matter of redistributing the workload, right? And just get a good handle on what an individual or a couple of people are feeling and just redistribute that workload. Maybe it's a matter of looking at how you're thanking your board members, showing gratitude. It could be as simple as a mention in a newsletter. It could be something bigger. But maybe the board is not feeling appreciated, or the individual who's feeling burnout isn't feeling appreciated. Refresher exercises are something that I particularly love when it comes to sort of lifting up the spirit of the board. And these could be things like StrengthsFinder exercises or the DISC exercises. There are so many of those tools. There's a nice outcome from those tools in that there's a greater understanding of each other and how the board works, but it's also a little bit of fun. And so helping boards, engage in a way that feels a little bit refreshing, and they get to take a moment out and say, okay, this is going to be okay, right? And then finally, governance audits. I recommend these every couple of years. Just take a look at all of your governance tools. Take a look at your structure, take a look at your behavior, take a look at what's in your policies. Sometimes that can be done internally. Sometimes you might want an external, a fresh perspective on all of your governance guidance documents. So that's just another way to kind of get at some immediate relief. All right. So I want to take a minute and sort of look at the board role and what we're asking of our board members. So first of all, as we all know, meetings, right? What is the frequency and the length of your meetings? And is that too much? Is it meeting the needs of the members of your board? Is there a legacy feeling? Do you feel like you have to have monthly meetings? And if so, can you question that? Can you say, let's shake it up a little bit and do something differently around the frequency and length of your board meetings? The amount of advanced preparation is a particular topic that I like to pay attention to, and I've got some more information a little bit later, but I really feel like how we prepare board members for their engagement is so important, and and can be fun and engaging. It's not just about reading, however many page packet. There are other ways of engaging board members to get them prepared and ready to discuss the big topics. Another area is the ease of engagement in meetings. Some people can get very frustrated in a meeting if they're not being heard, or the conversation continues to go down rabbit holes and it doesn't feel productive. There are ways that people come away from a meeting feeling that they weren't fully engaged, and we've got to pay attention to that, right? One of the most important ways, of course, is the strength of the board chair, and are they able to navigate the conversation, pull in voices that are not being heard, drive toward either a decision or a conclusion or consensus. And you'd be surprised. I think that we assume that all board chairs sort of innately know that skill or have that skill. But there are plenty of times where we can give board chairs a little bit of guidance and making sure that they are paying attention to the engagement in the room. Okay, the second bucket here is all about those other duties as assigned. And I think we're all sort of guilty of piling on additional responsibilities to board members once they have been elected or appointed. So maybe there are board subcommittees and committees that they have to be part of. Probably there's committee liaison responsibilities, chapter responsibilities if your organization has chapters. Poor treasurer, boy, we really load them up with a heck of a lot of responsibility. So paying attention to their workload is important. And then I want to mention the magnet effect. And this was in the Harvard Business Review article from October of 2025. And this is the idea that our very engaged and high performing board members act as a magnet for more work. When we see someone who is highly competent, we say, oh gosh, they would love to do this, or they would be good at that. And so we start loading them up. So just a caution around that magnet effect and making sure that work is getting distributed evenly or fairly. The last bucket, I think, is the cause of so much stress for our board members. And this is the idea of external communication, especially when there is a controversial decision and then we make the decision at a board meeting and then we say, okay, go forth and discuss it. And that can be terrifying for some board members. And we should give them all the tools that we can to give them talking points so that we're all working off the same page. We have one voice that we are going to that larger community with. But if there is social media involved, that too can inflame the feelings of stress and having to bear the responsibility of communicating and defending a decision. So two cautions there to really make sure the board feels prepared when there is a very large controversial decision that has to get communicated. The last bullet there is about perspective building. And sometimes we ask our board members to come into a discussion or a meeting with some perspectives from our members. What are our members feeling about X, Y, and Z? And that can also be daunting and can lead to the loudest voice syndrome, where they're only hearing from folks who might be complaining. And so how to do that perspective building in advance of a meeting is also important. All right. So I just felt compelled to make sure we talk about how we are selecting and onboarding board members, because that's where the expectation gets set. And so this whole idea of recruitment, role clarity, a lot of conversation now around competency-based board recruitment and selection process. That's probably a whole nother session in and of itself. The idea of onboarding, having those interactive conversations and onboarding sessions with your current board members so that new board members can get incorporated into the culture and the expectations of the role, providing them with governance resources throughout their time, and then also paying attention to ongoing training, because sometimes we just are making assumptions about what board members know and feel and understand, but maybe do some check-ins, maybe do some additional training so that they feel that they are up to speed. All right, here's where I want to really get into this idea of expectations and that second question of my theory around is it workload or is it a mismatch of expectations? So if you are in an organization with an operational oriented board, maybe it's the size of the organization, maybe it's the evolution of the organization, very new in its infancy. Maybe you need to have a sort of operational oriented board that are doers, right? And that's perfectly fine. Just know and understand that that needs to get communicated to those board members as they are being recruited, that there's an expectation for some amount of work outside of the board meeting. So But what I want to talk about are those organizations that are shifting to a more strategic role or have achieved that more strategic role, because sometimes that board culture can be confusing. If we are trying to help a board move into a more strategic arena, we've got to be thoughtful about what we're putting in front of them. Yes, every board needs to have some insight into the operational data so that they can perform their oversight duties, so that they can make sure they are paying attention to what the data or financials are telling us. But if we're only putting operational questions in front of a board that wants to be strategic, that's going to be really frustrating for a board member who is at that sort of strategic thought level. So making sure we either balance that or making sure we are very articulate about, hey, this is a doer board or this is a strategic board. And so again, from the get-go, trying to make sure that's communicated well from the beginning. I also think that going back to that sort of idea of competency-based recruitment, that if you are moving into that more strategic arena, thinking about ways that you can recruit board members that have that strategic thinking skill or are connected to the strategic plan in some way that is helpful to move the needle of the organization. So everything that a strategic board should be doing should be connected to that strategic plan. Sometimes it should be right on that agenda so that it's clearly indicated what this is connecting to in the organization's strategy. I'm a big fan of external stimulus. This might be articles, it might be organizations that have great speakers, maybe speakers outside of the organization to come in and shake things up a little bit. But I often get the question, who has the time to be more strategic? And I would challenge you that to be strategic, you really got to pay attention to the agenda construction. So thinking about the meeting as an experience for the board. What are the ways that you're going to engage the board in a way that is thoughtful and productive? Thinking about the meeting flow. If your board is one that their energy is up front, put those meaty topics right at the front. If they need a little time warming up, do those warm-up exercises, get the energy going, and then dive in. You know you're the board, your board, and how they like to operate. But paying attention to the energy of the room, when to take breaks, when to make sure they've got lots of snacks. I mean, all of that is super important to keep the board engaged. I also like to think about, once I've crafted an agenda, what's the percentage of this agenda in terms of time that we're dedicating to governance and oversight, and what percentage are we dedicating to strategic thought? And finding the right balance, right? And being just open and clear about it. Everyone uses consent agenda. There's parking lot tips and tools that that folks use to keep a meeting from going down a rabbit hole that can stress many people out. I also have been doing a lot of pairing up of discussions on agenda items. So pairing up board members to lead a discussion that gets them very engaged. They do advance work, they're ready to go, and therefore they're leading the discussion. And I think that's a really great way of getting more board members engaged in the meeting itself. I also love a guidance document. This allows me to take the whole agenda and give a little bit of historical information, indicate, are we looking for a decision or are we just discussing? And also providing some thought questions, some strategic thought questions for members to ponder before they get to the board meeting. Size of a packet is a big pet peeve of mine. I don't like to go over 50 pages for a board meeting packet. Sometimes I have to, but that's sort of my general rule. And then this idea of prioritization. I think this can also help with our board members feeling overloaded. If we get to the end of a board meeting, we say, okay, we've talked about a lot. What are the two things that we should leave this meeting with that really gets at the highest and best use of the organization's time? So that can also be a good exercise to walk the board through. All right, just a couple of other tips, and then we'll stop for questions. I really like multimedia advanced prep. So maybe that's me recording a presentation for the board so that it's seen in advance and it's discussed at the meeting versus giving the presentation at the board meeting. I also really like, as I mentioned, articles, and there are tools to help engage people in, or board members in, that content. So for example, whenever I introduce either a study or an article for discussion, I like to do an audio file, and you can get these on things like Notebook LM, Copilot, and they'll do a summary. You can tell it how long you want it to last, a 10-minute summary on the topics between pages 1 and 50, and they'll do this really interesting podcast summary, which is very engaging, easy to listen to, and it helps board members kind of get away from having to read a packet and be engaged in the content as well. Micro volunteers, again, if you're delegating a project and you're tempted to give it to that person who is the magnet, think about, can you get someone who's not on the board, who is maybe an emerging leader, maybe someone who has expressed interest in getting involved? Could they do a quick analysis and report for the board instead? I love the concept of micro volunteers because it really fits with today's fast-paced world. Buddies and mentors are a great way of helping board members navigate the stress of the role and reaching out to their colleagues to say, have I got this right? I'm feeling overwhelmed? So that's another great way to have them talk to their fellow colleagues. Decision timeline, I think, is a great way to help alleviate this stress that board members may be feeling, especially around big decisions. So I like to break big decisions or big controversial topics up into, say, 3 parts. You can figure out the timeline, but the first one is just to inquire about, what is this issue about? Who do we need to talk to? What do we need to understand? And then tell the board, we're going to have 3 hits at this. So this first one, the second one, we're going to review data and input and interviews and conversations, and then decide at the third one. That gives boards a time to process, to think about a decision, not feel rushed. That can also lead to burnout if it's decision after decision after decision and they don't have good time to be thoughtful. That can really wear someone out, right? Virtual participation in in-person meeting is always tough. We like to make sure we have buddies in the room to take care of the people who are joining virtually. Lots of other tips there that we could get into. And then I've also heard of some boards using coaching services, especially for officers. So if there's some need that they are struggling with, to bring in a coach to help them navigate it. Okay, so here we are, and when all else fails, you've gone through all these engagement activities, you've tried to understand the scope of the problem, but you have a person who's just burned out and can't continue. So what do? You got to have that conversation, right? You've got to have time to tackle it one-on-one, bring in another leader, have the conversation, try to identify if there are any solutions, and if there aren't, then let's talk about an exit path that is graceful and is compassionate. And it can be a matter of, hey, now maybe not is the right time. Maybe some things have emerged in their personal life that have prevented them from fully engaging. There's nothing wrong with that kind of exit. Find another role for them, or say, hey, let's take some time off and come back in a year or 2 when things have settled down. There's nothing wrong with that. If you have to go this route with a board member, I highly recommend the book Crucial Conversations, because it really helps with the structure of that kind of conversation so that everyone feels heard and is engaged in the outcome. Okay, here are some resources for you. There are so many blogs about burnout and how to navigate it. This book on Amazon looks really interesting. This is going to be my summer reading. So some really interesting resources for you, but let me just move into questions. Any questions in the chat that I didn't see while I was talking?
Hey there, Denise. That was terrific. Thanks for providing this overview. I've been trying to keep up with the comments. One is sort of high level. What advice would you provide if you've got that board that's shifting from an operational focus to a
Yeah.
more strategic focus? And how do
Yeah.
you move that forward smoothly?
Yes, great question. So, first of all, it should start with a conversation with the board. Do we want to go in this direction? Get buy-in, get everyone collaborating. What does that look like? What does that mean? And then build out a plan. Look, take a year, take a whole year and build out a plan that says, here's how we're going to move from one type of board to the next. And then make sure that you have a good definition of what is strategic. Right? What does it mean to be strategic? And are we going to be talking about just organizational strategy? Are we talking about the profession or the industry that we're in? Are we going to bring in foresight, one of my favorite topics? Are we going to think about how we communicate the fact that we are now a strategic body to our membership and to our stakeholders? So my biggest tip is to just be very deliberate, be very intentional, map it out for the board and say, this is what it looks like that we're doing now. And we want to get over here to what a more strategic board can be. And that also means some discipline. That's the hardest part. Once you've decided you want to be more strategic, being disciplined about what you put in front of the board, how you present it, how you tee it up, how you tease out the strategic questions is critically important. And then you've got to have the board members holding each other accountable. Every board's going to get in the weeds at some point on some conversation, but have a way to elevate the conversation, remind other board members that we need to get back to the 30,000-foot level. And there are ways to have fun with that. It doesn't have to feel like it's punitive, but more, hey, we said we wanted to be more strategic, so let's raise it up a little bit.
Denise, I'm going to depart from the topic a little bit, but it does go to helping those board members, especially the magnets, and that is board recruitment. I don't know if you have any insights on how we recruit boards. Some organizations suffer from, volunteers either being voluntold, or sometimes they suffer from a culture where they view it as it's someone's turn,
Right.
regardless of interest or skill set.
Right, right. And so that leads in real nicely with this idea of a competency-based board model, where you're talking about what are the characteristics we need from our boards and what do we need in terms of, accomplishing that strategic plan that we said we wanted to do. And then being very open about it, making sure that that information, if it's articulated in a way that can be consumed publicly, making sure that your potential candidates understand that model and how they fit in, what they can bring to the table. We have our nominating committee then in the nominating committee interviews talk about those competencies and try to align a candidate against those competencies. And then we use that to evaluate the candidacy for who's going on to the ballot. I think the days of it's so-and-so's turn is just over. We have so much at stake that we have to get done with limited resources. We're long past those days. So if you have to evaluate your governance structure in terms of how that gets done, who's involved, who is out there recruiting your potential board members, getting everyone on the same page that we have got to make sure we have the right people in the room to move the organization forward.
That's helpful. And I guess maybe shifting a little bit to the role of the board chair. They should be primarily facilitating meetings, but that entails an additional level of orientation and training for them. Do you have any suggestions for maybe a board chair that maybe themselves are putting too much on themselves or dominating meetings, but also that experience might be burning out other board members from the wanting to stay on the board. So it's a sort of two-part problem with the chair and what is the effect it's having on others.
Yeah, great point. So one of the things I like to do is I kick off my year with my board chair, and we have a whole half-day meeting of setting expectations. And one of the things at the top of the list for me is running a good, engaged board meeting. And so if I feel like a board chair is uncomfortable with that, we'll talk about ways to structure that, ways to engage folks in the meeting. I know that there are board presidents and chairs who are verbalizers. They are verbal processors. And so it can begin to feel like they are taking over the meeting. So that's another flag that we try to work with a chair to work through. It's also important that the chair or president is involved in the creation of the agenda. And so we talk through, okay, well, how is this agenda conversation? What do we want out of it? What are the outcomes that we're looking for? And who do we want to make sure we've got engaged? And so I think that, having a list of tips and requirements for your board chair is critical. And one of the things that they have got to know how to do is solicit the conversation, engage the conversation, corral the conversation toward a decision so that everyone sitting around the table feels comfortable that I'm heard and we're making momentum, we're making progress, we're moving toward a decision. I think are two critical goals of the board chair. I hope that answered the question.
I think it does. It's helpful. Um, Someone wanted just to repeat, what was the tool you used to create the sort of the mock podcast?
Yes, so Notebook LM, it's a free tool. It's a Google product. The other one is Microsoft Copilot. Now, here's the challenge. You want to make sure that what you're putting out there, if you're going to use Notebook LM, is fine for public distribution, right? You don't want to put confidential information on that Notebook LM because you just don't know, if you lose control of it. My understanding is Copilot, when it's an internal closed system, then you're safe. But just be careful about what you're putting in there. But it's fabulous. The Notebook LM has two different voices, a male and a female. You can tell it how long, what pages to focus on, what content to focus on, and what tone you want them to take, a serious tone, a jovial tone. So it's just a terrific tool and just a neat way to engage board members in the content.
That's great. I'm trying to scroll through and see some of the other comments. Any suggestions on maybe the size of a board to be effective? And I guess related question which you raised, the cadence of board meetings.
Yes, yes. Well, look, I don't like to be prescriptive about board size. You can have a larger board that is effective. My own bias is something less than a dozen. There's something about that size that is more navigatable and it lends itself to richer discussions. If it gets too large, you have a hard time getting everyone's input and engagement. And so that's my bias, but I've seen larger boards work. If you've got a really strong chair, really strong president, you're on point with what needs to get accomplished. So I hate to be prescriptive there. In terms of board meeting cadence, uh, look, since COVID, I think we've learned that we can be effective without 6 in-person board meetings. That's very expensive and probably unnecessary. So a couple of in-person board meetings that are well executed and designed. And then for ICE, we have another half dozen virtual, 5 to 6 throughout the year. But we give lots of breaks at the end of the year. We don't start until February. We get all of our other kickoff committees going. We start the board cadence in February, take some time off in the summer. So just making sure you're regulating around what your organization's priorities are and give them a little bit of time off. Absolutely.
That's
Well,
great suggestion.
we can end with one last question. Christine wants to know, do any dynamics change when you're dealing with a trade association board versus volunteer leaders in an individual member professional?
Yeah, good point. So professional societies is sort of my sweet spot. And I know that that tends to attract individuals who are there because they want to be there and they really understand their role and what they can contribute. Trade associations where they're kind of pre-assigned, look, you can still engage them and understand what it is that they want to accomplish, but you may have to, you may have to find some other tools in the toolbox. Yeah, I agree. It's a good point.
Okay, well, thank you, Denise, so much for doing this. Kurt, thank you for bringing us such a great speaker. and for always being there to do our tech, which you should be very happy Kurt's there to do the tech, and I'm not doing it. But anyway, everybody have a great summer, and we'll see you in September.
Great.
Thanks
So
everybody.
much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.